He crowned his new Luna until his pup ripped the crown off her head and placed it on the Omega's. The castle sat atop a cliff, its black stone walls stretching toward the stormy sky. The wind carried the scent of salt from the sea below, and the clouds above churned like dark waves. Within the walls of the ancient palace, a rare silence had fallen, broken only by the echo of footsteps on cold marble. It was the night of the coronation, the night when King Raylan would crown his new Luna, the queen who would stand beside him and guide the kingdom. Raylan stood alone in the throne room, tall and still, his dark hair brushing the collar of his velvet cloak. His eyes, sharp and gray as winter ice, swept across the rows of nobles and courtiers gathered before him. Tonight, the kingdom watched not just a ceremony, but the sealing of power, the binding of hearts, and the shifting of loyalties. At the center of the room, a single figure appeared, gliding forward under the soft glow of moonlight streaming through the stained glass windows. Leora, chosen to be the Luna, walked with careful grace. Her golden hair shimmered like sunlight on black stone, and her gown, deep blue with silver embroidery, whispered as she moved. There was pride in her steps, a quiet certainty that this crown would soon be hers. She had dreamed of this moment for years, planning and waiting, and finally it had arrived. Yet, even as she approached the throne, her gaze caught something that made her heart pause. Across the room at the far end stood the Omega, a figure long exiled, whose presence carried both danger and truth. They did not bow or speak, yet there was an undeniable pull in their steady, calm eyes. Something unspoken passed between the Omega and Raylan, a tension that seemed to charge the very air of the throne room. Raylan's jaw tightened as he watched Leora approach. She was his chosen Luna, the one who had been raised to rule beside him, the one he was expected to trust. Yet in the corner of his mind, a thought he could not shake lingered. The Omega, once an outcast, had shown courage and loyalty that even Leora could not match. His heart, though he would not admit it, stirred with an unfamiliar unease. The nobles whispered as Leora knelt before him, hands folded. "Rise, Luna," Raylan commanded, his voice deep and resonant, filling the chamber. Leora stood, and the crown, heavy and ancient, was brought forth. Crafted from blackened gold and etched with silver runes, it seemed almost alive, humming softly with the weight of generations. The chamber fell silent as Raylan lifted the crown, preparing to place it upon Leora's head. At that moment, Ether, Raylan's loyal pup, stirred from the shadows. Though small in size, Ether was no ordinary creature. Bound to Raylan through ancient magic, the pup could sense loyalty, truth, and hidden intentions. His eyes, glowing faintly under the torchlight, flickered toward the Omega. A tension passed through Ether's tiny frame, a warning, a recognition, a choice that had been made long before Raylan could see it. As Raylan lowered the crown, the room seemed to hold its breath. Leora's lips curved in a small, proud smile, her eyes shining with triumph. This was the moment she had waited for, the moment when her life and power would be secure. Yet even as the crown hovered above her head, a sudden movement drew every gaze. Ether leapt forward, faster than anyone could react. In a blur, the pup snatched the crown from Raylan's hands and dashed toward the Omega. Gasps echoed through the chamber as nobles shouted in alarm. The crown, heavy and glittering, was placed gently yet decisively upon the Omega's head. The silence that followed was deafening. Every eye in the throne room was fixed on the new, unexpected bearer of power. Leora froze, her mouth open in disbelief. What is this?" she whispered, her voice trembling. Her dreams of glory, of status, of being beside Raylan seemed to crumble in an instant. Raylan's eyes burned with a mixture of fury, confusion, and something he did not yet understand. The Omega, standing tall beneath the crown, did not flinch. Instead, their calm gaze swept across the room, and for a moment Raylan felt the full weight of their presence, the quiet strength, the unyielding will, and the subtle magnetism that had drawn him before. "Pup," Raylan called, his voice sharp but restrained. Ether's ears twitched, and he sat obediently at the Omega's feet, his tail curling around them protectively. The pup had made a choice, and there was no undoing it. The nobles murmured among themselves, their whispers carrying fear, curiosity, and doubt. Some saw treachery, some saw destiny. The castle, usually alive with ceremony and tradition, seemed to hold its breath in anticipation of what would come next. Raylan took a deep breath, forcing calm into his voice. "This crown," he said slowly, "represents the bond between Luna and King. It is not given lightly, nor taken without purpose." His gaze lingered on Leora, whose face now held a mixture of hurt and fury. Then he turned to the Omega, whose eyes remained steady. "And yet the crown has chosen." Leora's shoulders stiffened, her pride wounded. "Chosen?" she said sharply. "You cannot mean." "The crown speaks in ways we do not always understand," Raylan interrupted, his tone colder now, though his heart beat faster than it had in years. "Tonight the crown has spoken, and so we must listen." A heavy silence followed. The Omega bowed slightly, an unspoken acceptance of the crown's burden. Raylan could feel the pulse of the magic in the crown, sensing that it was more than a symbol. It was a test, a challenge, and perhaps even a prophecy. Something deep in the castle seemed to respond to the Omega, the air vibrating with a quiet, ominous power. Leora turned sharply, her dress rustling as she stormed toward the exit. "This is not over," she said, her voice trembling with rage and fear. "You will see. I will see it undone." Raylan's eyes followed her, but his thoughts were already elsewhere. He felt a pull toward the Omega, a curiosity mixed with something heavier, a longing he could not name. And yet the weight of the crown on their head was not light. Even in silence, it spoke of trials, of responsibility, and of truths that could not be ignored. The Omega took a careful step forward. "I do not seek this crown," they said softly, their voice carrying a calm authority that silenced even the murmuring nobles. "But if it is given, I will bear it, not for glory, not for power, but for the people who have waited for a ruler worthy of trust." Raylan's throat tightened. The words were simple, but they cut through the noise of ambition, pride, and expectation. He knew in that moment that the Omega was unlike anyone he had ever known. And for the first time, he wondered if perhaps the kingdom, the crown, and even his own heart had been waiting for this very choice. Ether nuzzled the Omega's hand, a small, reassuring gesture. Even the pup seemed to recognize the truth, that some bonds could not be commanded, only acknowledged. Raylan's gaze softened, though he would never admit it aloud. He was drawn to the calm certainty of the Omega, to the quiet strength that had no need for crowns or ceremony to prove itself. The nobles shifted uneasily. Some whispered of rebellion, others of fate, but none dared to challenge the scene unfolding before them. The crown, heavy with magic and history, had chosen its bearer, and the king could only follow where destiny led. Raylan stepped down from the throne, closing the space between himself and the Omega. He did not speak, but his presence was heavy, demanding attention and respect. The Omega's eyes met his, and in that silent exchange, 1,000 unspoken words passed between them. Words of challenge, of curiosity, and of a dangerous, uncharted attraction. Outside the castle, the wind howled through the cliffs, carrying with it the scent of the sea and the promise of storms to come. Inside, the crown gleamed atop the Omega's head, a symbol of change, of power, and of choices that could not be undone. The night was only beginning, and already the kingdom felt the tremors of destiny. As the torches flickered and shadows danced across the stone walls, Raylan finally spoke, his voice low and steady. "Tomorrow," he said, "we begin a new reign. And tonight we must prepare, for this crown does not forgive weakness." The Omega inclined their head, a faint smile touching their lips. "Then let us see if we are worthy." The room fell silent once more, but the tension lingered. Leora's words of defiance still echoed in the corridors, promising that the struggle was far from over. And in the shadows, unseen by most, Ether watched with bright, knowing eyes, ready to defend the choice he had made. The coronation, meant to cement one destiny, had shifted the balance of the kingdom in a single, bold move. And as Raylan and the Omega stood side by side, though not yet in agreement, the night seemed alive with the whisper of magic, the promise of challenge, and the spark of something deeper, something that could change hearts as surely as it could change the fate of a kingdom. And far above the cliffs, the moon rose, pale and silver, casting its light upon the crown, upon the king, and upon the Omega, as if marking the beginning of a story that would echo through generations. The morning after the coronation dawned pale and gray, as if the world itself held its breath. The castle lay quiet, its stone corridors echoing with whispers of the night before. The nobles, though still murmuring among themselves, had begun to accept the impossible, that the crown had chosen the Omega over Leora, and that even King Raylan's judgment had been overturned in a single, bold act. The Omega sat alone in the high tower, the crown still resting upon their head. It felt heavy, not just with gold and silver but with something deeper, the weight of history, the duty of rulership, and a sense of destiny pressing down upon their shoulders. Outside the tower window, the wind swept over the cliffs, carrying the distant cries of seabirds and the faint scent of the sea. They had not sought this crown, never had they wished for power, and yet here it was, as if the world itself had called them forward. The silence of the tower was broken only by Ether, who sat loyally at their feet, tail curled, eyes bright with quiet intelligence. "Do you understand what this means?" the Omega asked softly, speaking to the pup as much as to themselves. "This crown, it is not just a symbol. It is a test, and if I fail—" Ether tilted his head as though answering without words. The Omega reached down to stroke his soft fur, feeling a spark of comfort. Loyalty, even in a creature as small as Ether, could be a guiding light in times of darkness. Below, the castle was alive with tension. Leora moved like a storm through the halls, her pride and ambition burning fiercely. She had trained her whole life to rise to power beside Raylan, and now the kingdom saw her displacement as shameful, even dangerous. Yet beneath her fury there was also fear. The crown that had rejected her spoke of a magic she did not understand, a force that was beyond her control, and that, more than anything, unsettled her. Raylan, meanwhile, walked the corridors in a storm of thought. His mind had not left the Omega since the coronation. He had watched them stand tall beneath the weight of the crown, calm and unafraid. He could not deny the pull he felt toward them, a mixture of curiosity, fascination, and something softer, warmer that he had not felt in years. And yet, his duty as king demanded caution. He could not ignore the fragile balance of his court, nor the bitterness that lingered in Leora's gaze. By midday, Raylan summoned the Omega to the council chamber. The room was heavy with anticipation. Nobles crowded the long stone benches, their whispers like the rustling of dry leaves. At the head of the room, Raylan's cloak hung around his shoulders like a shadow, and his eyes, cold yet searching, studied the Omega carefully. "You bear the crown," Raylan said, his voice even but carrying the weight of authority. "But a crown is not simply worn, it must be understood. It must be commanded with wisdom and tempered with mercy. Can you do this?" The Omega met his gaze steadily. "I do not seek glory, my king, but I will protect the people, uphold justice, and face the trials that this crown demands. That is all I ask." The nobles murmured, some in approval, some in doubt. Leora, standing at the back, clenched her fists. Her lips pressed into a hard line, and her eyes darted between the king and the Omega. Pride burned in her chest, but beneath it, fear lingered. The crown had spoken, yes, but what did it truly demand? And could anyone truly withstand its power? Raylan sighed, a sound of weariness and thought. He had hoped the ceremony would be simple, a matter of tradition and law. Instead, the choice made by a small, extraordinary pup had upended centuries of expectation. And yet when he looked at the Omega, he saw something undeniable, a strength that was not born of ambition but of character. "Very well," he said finally, "we will begin the lessons of rule. And you, Luna, must learn the ways of the court if you wish to survive." His gaze flicked to Leora and she stiffened. Though she had once been chosen, she now had a place beneath the crown, a subordinate position that chafed at her pride. The first lessons were not of diplomacy or ceremony, but of truth. Raylan took the Omega to the library, a vast hall filled with towering shelves of ancient texts. Each book whispered secrets of kings and queens long past, of mistakes and triumphs, of wars won and lost. Here, knowledge was power, and understanding the weight of the crown meant understanding the mistakes of those who had worn it before. "You must see the crown not as a symbol of authority," Raylan explained, gesturing to the golden circlet. "It is a mirror. It reflects not only who you are, but who you will become. The kingdom watches, yes, but it also tests. Every choice you make, every action will echo through generations." The Omega nodded, absorbing each word. There was no pride in their gaze, only quiet determination. "Then I will not fail," they said simply. "I will bear its weight even if it bends me to my limits." Raylan studied them, and for a fleeting moment he felt something he had not felt in years: hope. Perhaps the crown had chosen wisely. Perhaps the kingdom, long steeped in fear and shadows, could yet see light. Yet, even as he spoke, a shadow lingered in the corners of the castle. Leora's ambition was far from extinguished. She moved in secret, whispering to allies and gathering those still loyal to her. Every glance, every conversation, every plan was a small flame that threatened to ignite a firestorm of rebellion. The crown had spoken, yes, but it could not control desire, envy, or fear. Days passed, and the Omega grew into their role with a quiet grace that surprised even Raylan. They learned the rituals of the court, the intricacies of law, and the subtleties of diplomacy. They moved through the castle not as an intruder, but as a presence that commanded respect without demanding it. And all the while, Raylan watched. He saw the way the Omega treated those who served them with kindness, the way they listened before judging, the way they faced every challenge with calm and careful thought. His heart, long armored against hope, began to stir. Yet he did not allow himself to hope too freely. Trust, he knew, was earned slowly, and the crown had already proven that destiny could change in an instant. One evening, as the sun set behind the cliffs, painting the sky in crimson and gold, Raylan found himself in the gardens with the Omega. The air was cool, carrying the scent of night-blooming flowers. The fountain sparkled in the fading light, and the gentle rustle of leaves seemed almost to speak. "You have changed much in these days," Raylan said quietly, watching the Omega examine a rare bloom. "The crown seems to suit you." The Omega looked up, their eyes calm yet piercing. "The crown is heavy," they said, "not just in metal but in responsibility. Every choice I make echoes beyond these walls, and yet I feel its power not as a burden but as a guide." Raylan's throat tightened. He wanted to reach for them, to touch, to speak words he could not yet form. And in that silence, the pull between them became almost unbearable. Something unspoken hovered in the air: respect, admiration, perhaps even the faint beginnings of trust, and something more. A rustle in the shadows interrupted the moment. Ether emerged, tail wagging, bringing a sense of grounding, reminding Raylan that the world outside their personal tension still moved, still demanded action. "Tomorrow," Raylan said at last, "we must meet with the council. The crown cannot remain a mystery. It must act and we must guide it." The Omega inclined their head. "I am ready. Whatever challenges lie ahead, we will face them together." Even as Raylan listened, he knew that the word "together" carried more weight than either of them yet realized. The kingdom was alive with uncertainty, and the crown's true power had not yet revealed itself. Night fell over the castle, and with it came a whisper of foreboding. Outside the walls, the wind moved through the cliffs like a warning. Somewhere in the shadows, Leora plotted, her ambition sharp and patient. She would not accept defeat lightly, and the crown had not yet tested her resolve. Inside, Raylan walked the corridors alone, Ether at his side. The pup's glowing eyes seemed to pierce the shadows, sensing danger, loyalty, and the truth hidden in human hearts. Raylan's mind raced. Could the Omega withstand the trials ahead? Could he trust them and himself? The crown, resting upon the Omega's head even now as they slept, pulsed faintly with magic. It had chosen, yes, but its work was far from done. Shadows lingered, and power, ambition, and desire still moved unseen in the halls of the castle. The kingdom would test them all, and only those who could face both their own hearts and the weight of destiny would survive. And so, as dawn approached, Raylan looked toward the high tower where the Omega slept, and a single thought filled his mind. Perhaps the crown had chosen not just a ruler, but a hope that could bring light to a kingdom long shadowed in fear. But even hope, he knew, would be tested, and the storms of ambition and destiny were only beginning to stir. The blood moon rose over the horizon, casting a crimson glow across the cliffs and the castle. Its light spilled through the towers and gardens, painting everything in a strange, eerie red. The kingdom seemed to hold its breath as if the moon itself had awoken the shadows hidden in stone and heart. King Raylan stood at the edge of the castle terrace, cloak billowing in the wind. His eyes, sharp and gray, were fixed on the distant forest where ancient curses and whispered legends claimed to dwell. The Omega, standing beside him, wore the crown with a quiet dignity. Their calm gaze contrasted sharply with the tension that twisted Raylan's chest. Tonight, the prophecy hidden in the crown would awaken, and no one could ignore the trials it promised. "You are certain you wish to do this?" Raylan asked, voice low but steady. He knew the forest well. It had claimed many who dared to enter without caution. "Once we cross the boundary, there is no turning back until the night is complete." The Omega nodded, their fingers brushing lightly over the edge of the crown. "I do not fear what comes," they said softly. "I only wish to see the truth of the crown and of myself." Ether, Raylan's small pup, padded silently between them, his faint glow illuminating the dark stone. Though small, he was fierce and unyielding in his loyalty. His eyes flickered toward the forest, sensing the unseen dangers that awaited. The bond between pup and Omega was quiet but undeniable. Ether had chosen, and he would protect that choice with every fiber of his being. The forest loomed ahead, ancient and shadowed, its trees twisted and tall, their roots thick like veins through the earth. Legends spoke of spirits trapped in the trees, of illusions that preyed on fear, and of whispers that could make a heart falter. But the Omega did not hesitate. Together, they and Raylan crossed the threshold, leaving the safety of stone and torchlight behind. The forest greeted them with silence. Even the wind seemed cautious, moving only in hushed murmurs through the gnarled branches. The crown glimmered faintly under the blood moon, as if sensing the trials to come. Each step deeper into the forest felt heavier, not in body but in spirit, as if unseen eyes watched, judging, testing. "Stay close," Raylan said, his voice barely above a whisper. The Omega's calm presence was steady, a contrast to the tension in Raylan's shoulders. "This forest, it plays on your fears. It will try to turn you against each other." "I am not afraid," the Omega replied, voice steady. Yet as they moved forward, faint rustling and shadows flickered at the edges of vision. Each whisper of wind seemed to carry words, teasing doubt and worry. They passed through a grove where trees arched overhead like cathedral spires, and their roots formed natural arches on the ground. A faint glow pulsed among the roots, as though the earth itself breathed with magic. The first challenge came swiftly. Shadows detached themselves from the trees, forming shapes that mimicked loved ones, allies, and enemies. Raylan froze as he saw Leora emerge from the darkness, crownless, her eyes filled with cold fury. "You were supposed to be mine," Leora's voice echoed in the trees, soft and sharp all at once. "The crown belongs to me. It always belonged to me." Raylan's heart tightened. "It is not her," he whispered, reaching for the Omega's hand. The shadows shifted, bending and twisting as if alive. The forest tested not only courage but also clarity of heart. The illusions were precise, capable of making one doubt reality itself. The Omega stepped forward calmly, their voice firm. "Leora is not here. She is your fear, nothing more." The words seemed to cut through the shadows, causing the illusions to flicker and dissolve like mist. The crown pulsed faintly, acknowledging their focus, their ability to see truth over fear. "Good," Raylan said quietly, though his hands shook slightly. He had faced many battles, yet the forest tested more than strength. It tested heart, loyalty, and trust. He realized with an odd clarity that his fear of losing the Omega was as dangerous as any shadow. The forest grew darker as they advanced. Strange lights danced among the branches, faint glimmers like will-o'-the-wisps. A soft whispering filled the air, unintelligible at first, then clearer with each step. The voices spoke of past mistakes, regrets, and betrayals, each one designed to weigh heavy on the mind. "You cannot hide from yourself here," the Omega said, eyes steady. "The crown will not allow it." Raylan exhaled sharply. Memories of past failures, of choices made in fear or anger, surfaced unbidden. Faces of those he had wronged, of allies betrayed or friends lost, flashed before him. His chest ached with the weight of regret, but he forced himself to focus. The Omega's calm presence was a tether, a reminder that the trials were shared, and that trust must not falter. Ether barked softly, and a shadow lunged toward them. Raylan drew his sword, but the shadow dissolved before his blade could strike. The pup's glowing eyes met his, and in that glance Raylan felt courage renewed. They were not alone. Together they could face whatever the forest sent. Hours passed, or perhaps only moments. Time seemed to twist within the forest. Every path seemed both familiar and impossible. Every whisper carried warnings and temptations. Yet the Omega's steady voice guided them, their clarity cutting through the forest's illusions. Finally they reached the heart of the forest, a small clearing bathed in the blood moon's light. At its center, a stone pedestal emerged, engraved with ancient runes that pulsed faintly. The crown responded, glowing softly as if drawn to the magic. "The test," the Omega said softly. "This is it. Whatever the crown asks, we must face it together." From the shadows emerged visions, not of illusions this time, but of the kingdom itself. Flames licked the stone towers, nobles bowed in fear, and Leora stood triumphant, her crown shining in firelight. The vision shifted, showing a kingdom broken by fear, mistrust, and ambition untempered by compassion. Raylan's heart thundered. "This is what could happen," he murmured. If we fail, yes," the Omega said gently, placing a hand on the pedestal. "But if we succeed, we have a chance to change everything." Their gaze met Raylan's, steady and unwavering, and he felt the pull of trust, respect, and something deeper, warmer, stronger than he had allowed himself to feel before. Together they stepped forward. The crown pulsed, and a faint hum filled the clearing, resonating with their hearts. The forest seemed to lean closer, listening, watching, as if the very trees demanded proof of worthiness. Raylan's hand found the Omega's, fingers brushing lightly, and a spark of connection ran through them both. "Whatever comes," Raylan said quietly, voice low, "we face it as one." "Yes," the Omega replied, "together." The visions intensified, testing their hearts. Raylan saw himself fail again, losing the crown, failing the kingdom, and hurting the Omega. The Omega faced visions of betrayal, of being cast out, of watching the world crumble despite their best intentions. And yet, even in the worst visions, their hands remained linked, their resolve unbroken. Ether barked sharply and the visions dissipated into mist. The pedestal glowed brighter and the crown's pulse matched their heartbeats. The trial had been one of trust, courage, and unity. The forest, satisfied with their choice, seemed to exhale, shadows retreating into the darkness, leaving only the blood moon above. Raylan dropped to one knee in exhaustion, his chest heaving. It is done," he whispered. The weight of fear, doubt, and regret lifted slightly, replaced by a sense of clarity he had not felt in years. The Omega knelt beside him, crown gleaming faintly in the moonlight. "No," they said softly. "It is only beginning, but now we know what it asks of us. And we can meet it together." The forest fell silent, and for the first time that night, Raylan felt hope bloom in his chest. Hope for the kingdom, for the crown, and for the Omega who had captured not just the magic of destiny, but something far more dangerous, his heart. As they made their way back toward the castle, shadows lingered at the edges, reminders that trials were never fully over. Leora's ambition had not waned, nor had the whispers of dissent. Yet for now, the Omega walked with a confidence that drew Raylan closer with each step, their bond strengthened by shared courage and trust. The castle came into view, bathed in the red light of the blood moon. Torches flickered along the walls, welcoming them home. Inside, the court would wait, full of questions, doubt, and expectation. Outside, the night stretched endless and uncertain, full of shadows yet rich with possibility. And as Raylan and the Omega entered the castle, Ether trotting loyally at their side, the crown pulsed once more, a promise, a challenge, and a reminder that even in darkness, the right choice made together could change the fate of a kingdom. But somewhere in the distance, a whisper traveled through the halls, a warning of ambition not yet spent, of challenges still hidden, and of a storm that was only beginning to stir. The night of shadows had ended. But the dawn of destiny was only just beginning. The castle was alive with quiet tension the morning after the blood moon trial. Torches flickered along the stone walls, casting long shadows that danced as if alive. Nobles and courtiers moved in hushed murmurs, their eyes shifting constantly toward the high tower where the Omega stood, crown resting lightly on their head. King Raylan walked through the halls with measured steps, cloak trailing behind him. His mind still carried the weight of the forest trial, the visions, and the whispers of destiny that lingered even now. He could feel the eyes of the kingdom upon him, measuring not just his rule but his judgment, his choices, and his heart. The Omega descended the tower staircase gracefully, the crown glimmering faintly under the morning light. Ether trotted beside them, tail held high and eyes bright, as if sensing the trials ahead were far from over. The pup's loyalty, unshakable and unwavering, reminded Raylan that the path forward was not one he could walk alone. Leora had not yet appeared. Her absence in the halls was a shadow that followed every glance, a tension in every whispered conversation. She had been silent since the trial, her ambition burning quietly, like embers beneath ash. Raylan knew that sooner or later she would confront the crown and the Omega, and when she did, the kingdom itself might tremble under the weight of her fury. The council chamber was filled as Raylan and the Omega entered. The nobles watched them with wary eyes, curiosity and fear mingling in equal measure. Raylan took his place at the head of the long stone table, his gaze sweeping across the assembly. The Omega stepped forward, crown shining with the promise of duty and power, and their presence commanded the room without a word. Raylan spoke first, voice calm but firm. "The crown has chosen not only a ruler but a test. This kingdom has faced shadows and whispers of betrayal for too long. The trial is not yet over, but the choices we make now will define the future." The Omega's voice followed, steady and clear. "The crown is not a symbol of power alone. It is a responsibility, a call to act with justice, compassion, and courage. Those who serve the kingdom must do so with honesty and truth, for only then can we rise beyond fear." A murmur rippled through the chamber. Some nobles nodded in quiet agreement, others exchanged wary glances. Leora stepped forward, finally revealing herself, her gown of deep blue catching the light, her eyes, sharp and unyielding, fixed on the Omega. "You speak of justice," she said, voice calm but cold. "Yet you wear a crown that was meant for me. The throne is mine by right, and you have stolen it." The Omega met her gaze without fear. "The crown chooses not by right alone, but by character, by courage, and by willingness to bear its weight. You sought it for ambition. I bear it for duty." Raylan's jaw tightened. The tension in the chamber was almost tangible. Leora's pride clashed with the calm authority of the Omega, and the room seemed to lean forward, holding its collective breath. "And what if she refuses to yield?" Raylan whispered to the Omega, his voice low. "I will not fight for glory," the Omega replied softly, "but I will not step aside from duty either." Their calmness carried weight, and Raylan felt a pull in his chest, admiration, concern, and something far more complicated stirring within him. Leora's eyes narrowed, but she did not strike. Instead, she turned sharply, walking toward the hall exit. Her steps were deliberate, and every movement radiated controlled fury. "You may have won the crown," she said over her shoulder, "but the fight is not over. The kingdom remembers who was wronged, and so shall I." With that she left, leaving a room thick with tension and whispered questions. Raylan exhaled slowly. "She will not rest," he said, "but neither will we fail. This crown demands more than courage. It demands unity, and we must provide it." The days that followed were ones of planning, learning, and quiet negotiation. The Omega worked tirelessly, listening to nobles, understanding the needs of the kingdom, and learning the intricacies of rule. Raylan observed, sometimes silently, sometimes offering counsel, but always with a careful restraint. He could feel his heart drawn to the Omega in ways he could not yet name, and the weight of responsibility pressed on both of them, binding them in shared purpose. Evenings brought moments of quiet reflection. In the gardens, under the silver glow of the moon, Raylan and the Omega would walk side by side. The crown gleamed faintly in the night, a reminder of duty and destiny. Words were few, but in the silence, understanding grew. A touch of the hand, a shared glance, a small gesture of trust, these were the bonds that formed between them, stronger than any crown could symbolize. One night, as the wind rustled through the ancient trees, Raylan spoke quietly. "I have seen many crowns," he said, "and many rulers, but never one like you. You bear this weight without seeking it, and yet you carry it with strength I cannot name." The Omega turned, eyes calm, yet soft with quiet warmth. "The crown does not make me strong. It only reveals what is already here," they said, placing a hand lightly on Raylan's arm. "We all have shadows to face, all burdens to bear, but together perhaps we can rise beyond them." Raylan's throat tightened. He had faced battles, storms, and betrayals, yet never had he encountered a trial so personal, so quietly overwhelming. He felt hope, fear, and desire all mingling within him. And above all, he felt the truth that the crown had shown him. Strength was not power alone, but courage, trust, and the willingness to change. The next day brought a test of the kingdom itself. Reports reached the castle of unrest in the provinces, nobles loyal to Leora attempting to stir rebellion. The crown, sensing the threat, pulsed faintly, guiding the Omega toward action. Together, Raylan and the Omega rode through the city, the pup running at their side, glowing faintly in the sunlight. The people, though wary at first, began to recognize the calm authority of the Omega. They listened to their words, trusted their guidance, and slowly the unrest began to fade. Where fear had once ruled, courage and hope began to take root. Even Leora's allies, though reluctant, began to see the Omega's strength. The crown had chosen wisely, not for ambition but for wisdom and compassion. And in that the kingdom began to change. As evening fell, Raylan and the Omega returned to the castle, the blood-red moon now replaced by a pale silver glow. The castle walls seemed brighter, though shadows still lingered, a reminder that darkness could never fully vanish. In the throne room, Raylan finally addressed the Omega directly, stepping close enough that the warmth of their presence brushed against him. "You have changed the kingdom," he said quietly, "and you have changed me." The Omega met his gaze steadily. "Then we rise together," they said softly, their hand brushing against his, "not as king and subject, but as partners in purpose." Raylan's heart stirred. He reached slowly, hesitantly, and took the Omega's hand in his. The touch was gentle, affirming, and filled with the quiet promise of trust and connection. "Together," he whispered, voice trembling slightly. Ether barked softly, tail wagging, as if approving of the union. The small pup had guided them, protected them, and now watched as a new bond took root, one of loyalty, courage, and the beginnings of love. Outside, the wind shifted, carrying whispers of change through the kingdom. The people, sensing the strength of the crown's true bearer, began to rally. Where shadows had threatened to spread, light and hope now moved steadily, growing stronger with each passing day. Leora did not return that night, nor the next. Her absence was a reminder that ambition, unchecked, could fester. But the kingdom had learned a lesson far greater than any feud. Leadership was not claimed through force, but earned through courage, justice, and compassion. Raylan and the Omega stood side by side on the castle terrace, looking toward the horizon. The sun rose slowly, painting the sky in shades of gold and rose. The kingdom lay below, silent yet alive, a realm waiting for its rulers to shape its destiny. The Omega turned, eyes softening as they looked at Raylan. "This crown," they said, "was never meant to be easy, but it was never meant to be faced alone either." Raylan nodded, understanding more than words could convey. He felt the weight of the crown, the trials they had faced, and the bond that had grown between them. "I understand," he said, "and I will not let it fall, not as long as we stand together." The crown pulsed faintly in the morning light, as if acknowledging their vow. And for the first time since it had chosen its bearer, it seemed at peace. Ether curled at their feet, tail wagging softly, a small guardian of loyalty and love. And in that quiet moment, Raylan and the Omega shared a glance, a connection forged through trials, strengthened by trust and tempered by hope. The kingdom would face challenges yet. Shadows would stir, ambition would rise, and choices would demand courage. But together, they had proven that strength was not in power alone, but in heart, mind, and the willingness to face darkness with another by your side. And as the sun climbed higher, bathing the castle in light, the crown shone brightly, a symbol of redemption, unity, and the promise of a new era. Raylan, the Omega, and the loyal pup Ether stood together, ready to meet whatever destiny awaited. For the first time in years, the kingdom felt a pulse of hope, steady, strong, and unyielding. And in that pulse, the story of the crown, the king, the Omega, and the bond they shared reached a moment of quiet triumph, though the whispers of legend promised that the tale was only just beginning. The crown had chosen, the kingdom had watched, and now together they would rise.